Hello viewers. When James meets Diep again, will their love return? Will the secretary harm Diep? Will she take James from Diep? When the heart has lost its way, Diep returns to James. Will happiness really come? The night was heavy with the weight of untold stories, a silence that hung in the air like a fog, thick and inescapable. James stood by the window, staring at the city below, where lights flickered like distant stars so far, yet so close to his heart. His life had been filled with success, power, and prestige, but in the quiet moments when the world was asleep, his heart ached. Diep had left him, not physically, but emotionally. It was as if their love, once a bright flame, had been smothered by the weight of expectations, misunderstandings, and the choices they both made. James thought about her every day, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke of the simplest things, the way her smile had once been the only thing he needed to feel at home. But she was gone now, and with her, the warmth had faded from his life. But life has a way of throwing curveballs. Sometimes, in the most unexpected of moments, the heart finds its way back to what it once lost. Diep hadn't planned to return. She'd spent months, maybe even years, convincing herself that their love was nothing more than a fleeting illusion. That James, for all of his charm and success, was the man who had let her slip away, his absence a constant reminder of how far apart they had grown. She tried to fill the void through work, friends, and distractions, but nothing seemed to erase the emptiness she carried inside. It wasn't until she received a letter from James, written with an honesty and vulnerability that she hadn't known he was capable of, that something stirred within her. In his words, she could hear the rawness of his regret, his longing for a future they had once dreamt of. And for the first time in a long while, Diep felt a spark of hope. With a mix of hesitation and curiosity, she boarded the plane that would take her back to him. The journey was filled with conflicting emotions: fear, excitement, sorrow, and a deep sense of yearning. Could she really trust him again? Could love, once broken, ever be restored? And most importantly, did she still love him? When Diep arrived, she was met by a man who had changed in ways she never expected. James was no longer the confident CEO who had once seemed invincible. His eyes, though still filled with ambition, carried a vulnerability that he hadn't shown before. The man standing before her was not the person she had once fallen in love with, but in many ways, he was someone she could love again. Diep, he whispered her name, as if it were a prayer, a question, a hope. His voice was raw with emotion, as if he feared this moment might slip through his fingers like sand. She didn't know what to say. The years apart had turned their love into something unfamiliar. The memories of their time together felt distant, like a dream she couldn't fully grasp. Yet, in his eyes, she saw the man she had once known, the man who had loved her fiercely, despite all the mistakes and miscommunications. "Can we start again?" James's voice trembled slightly, as if he was unsure whether Diep was still the same woman who had once believed in their future. Diep felt the weight of his words. She had spent so much time building walls around her heart, trying to protect herself from the pain of their separation. But now, standing here, in front of him, those walls seemed to crumble, piece by piece. "I don't know," she said softly, her voice carrying the burden of all the unanswered questions. "I don't know if happiness can really come back to us. The past ... the hurt ... it's not easy to forget." James took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I can't change the past," he murmured, "but I promise you, I'll do everything I can to make the future better. I've learned, I've grown. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Diep. I'm asking for a chance to rebuild what we once had." For a long moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of their history pressing down on them. Diep's heart ached, not just for the lost time, but for the love that had once burned so brightly between them. Could they truly rebuild it? Could they create a new foundation on which to stand? As the days passed, they began to rediscover each other. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension, of awkward silences, of doubts that lingered like shadows. But there were also moments of tenderness, of laughter, of a connection that had not completely faded. James proved that he was willing to change, to be the man Diep needed him to be. He listened, truly listened, to her fears and dreams. He showed her, through his actions, that he was committed to rebuilding their relationship, not just for the sake of love, but because he had realized that without her, his world felt empty. Diep, in turn, allowed herself to be vulnerable again. She let her walls down, piece by piece, as she saw the man before her not as the person who had hurt her, but as the person who was willing to fight for their future. One evening, as they walked along the familiar path they had once walked together, James stopped. He turned to face her, his eyes full of determination. "Diep," he said, his voice steady, "I don't know if happiness is guaranteed, but I do know that, together, we can make it a possibility. Will you marry me?" Her breath caught in her throat, the question hanging between them like a dream she had once let go of. And in that moment, Diep realized that the love they shared, though scarred, was not beyond healing. She had been afraid to love again, but in James's eyes, she saw a future that was worth taking a chance on. With a soft smile, she answered, "Yes, I will marry you." Will their wedding take place? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain: despite the pain and the brokenness, Diep and James had found their way back to each other. And sometimes, when the heart has lost its way, it takes a leap of faith to find the path back home. Days passed, and as Diep and James walked hand in hand through the tangled streets of their shared past, something magical began to unfold between them. It wasn't the kind of love that was perfect from the start. No, this was a love that needed time, care, and patience to bloom again. But with every shared glance, every whispered conversation, every small, tender moment, the love they once had seemed to grow stronger, more resilient. Diep had her doubts, still, the shadows of their past, the hurt, the betrayals didn't simply vanish because James had asked for a second chance. She had learned to guard her heart, to shield it from disappointment. But with him, there was a warmth that had started to melt the ice that had formed around her. They spent quiet evenings together, sharing stories about their lives apart. James told her about the pain of losing her, the ache that had gnawed at his chest every day without her. He spoke of his regrets, of the mistakes he had made, and the lessons he had learned. But more than anything, he spoke of how, through all the chaos, he had never stopped loving her. "I thought I was too busy to be happy," James admitted one evening, as they sat on the porch of his house, watching the sun dip below the horizon. "I thought that success, power, all of that would fill the void. But it didn't, not without you." Diep's heart softened at his words, though part of her still couldn't fully believe in the transformation he had gone through. He had been distant, lost in his own world before. Had he really changed? Or was this just the desperation of a man afraid to lose everything? She looked at him, her eyes full of uncertainty, but also hope. And what if this time, it's not enough? What if the love we once had is just a memory we can never recapture? James reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "We can't change the past, Diep, but we can start again together. I'll show you every day how much you mean to me. And I'll fight for us, for you." It was hard to argue with his sincerity, the honesty that poured from him like a river that had long been dammed. And maybe, just maybe, she thought, there was a chance for them to rebuild what had been broken. A week later, James invited her to dinner, this time at a small, quiet restaurant that had once been their favorite place to visit before their lives had spiraled into chaos. The table was set for two, and the soft glow of candlelight flickered between them, casting delicate shadows across their faces. For the first time in a long time, there was peace between them. The air wasn't thick with unresolved issues or unspoken words. It felt light, almost like the beginning of something new. James smiled as he reached for her hand across the table, his thumb gently brushing the back of it. "I know things have been difficult, Diep, but I believe in us. I believe in what we can build together." Diep met his gaze, searching his eyes for any trace of the man who had once caused her so much pain. What she found instead was a man who was afraid, yes, but also willing to fight for what he wanted for her. And in that moment, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she could give him the chance he was asking for. "James," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper, "I still have questions, I still have doubts, but I want to try. I want to see if we can find our way back to each other." James's eyes lit up, and for the first time in years, there was a genuine sense of hope in them. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving to you that you made the right choice." But the road to healing was never smooth. There were days when Diep would catch herself second-guessing, wondering if this was all just a fleeting dream. There were moments when she felt the pull of the past, the sting of betrayal still fresh in her heart. And James, though he tried his best to prove his love, couldn't always bridge the gap that time and pain had created between them. Yet, with each passing day, their connection grew stronger. They found comfort in the small things, cooking dinner together, talking late into the night, and simply being in each other's presence without the weight of old wounds hanging over them. One evening, James surprised Diep with a small gift, a locket with a photograph of the two of them from the night they first met. "I never want to forget how we started," he said softly, placing the locket around her neck. "This is my promise to you. No matter what happens, I'll always remember the love we had. And I'll work every day to make sure we have that again." Tears welled up into Diep's eyes as she touched the locket, feeling its weight against her chest. She had never expected to feel this way again, never thought she would trust him enough to give them another chance. But here they were, both willing to fight for a future they had once believed was lost. As time went on, the love they shared began to bloom anew, not as it was before, but as something deeper, more understanding. It was no longer a love built on naive dreams, but on mutual respect, on the willingness to face their pasts and grow from them. Eventually, they made the decision to get married. The wedding was simple, but it was filled with love and emotion. Their vows were not just promises to love each other forever, but to never give up, no matter how hard the road ahead might be. When Diep walked down the aisle, James's eyes filled with tears. She was the woman he had lost and found again, the woman who had made him believe in second chances. And as they exchanged vows, surrounded by the people who had supported them through their journey, they both knew that this was just the beginning. Will happiness really come? It had already started to. With every step they took together, they learned that happiness wasn't something handed to you, it was something you fought for, something you built with trust, patience, and love. And as they stood there, side by side, ready to face the future, they knew that as long as they had each other, happiness would find a way. In the journey of love, life is rarely a smooth path. Mistakes, misunderstandings, and the weight of past experiences can often cloud our hearts and make us question whether happiness is even possible. But through the story of Diep and James, we learn that true love is not just about finding someone perfect, it's about finding someone who is willing to fight for you, to grow with you, and to never give up on the bond that ties you together. Here are the lessons we can take from their story. Love requires effort and patience. Love is not just a feeling, it's an action. Diep and James prove that real love is built on patience, understanding, and effort. When things seem broken, it's easy to walk away, but true love means doing the hard work to rebuild what was lost. Whether it's mending a relationship, learning from past mistakes, or simply being there for someone, love is something you nurture over time.